Remember the fuzzed-out riffs, the denim-and-leather clad mystique, and the thunderous drum solos that birthed a revolution? Before the gloss of the 80s, the 1970s was the primordial crucible where heavy metal was forged. Here are 20 heavy metal bands you forgot existed. 1. Sir Lord Baltimore. It's 1970, and a power trio from Brooklyn, New York, unleashes a sonic apocalypse so frantic and loud it feels like it could tear a hole in the fabric of reality. That was Sir Lord Baltimore, with a front man, John Garner, who was both the drummer and the lead singer, delivering a high-pitched, frenetic wail while performing complex, thunderous fills. They were a whirlwind of unhinged energy. Their debut album, Kingdom Come, was a blistering assault of proto-punk fury, overdriven guitar, and a rhythm section that sounded like it was falling down a flight of stairs in perfect time. They had the aggression, the power, and a sound that was arguably heavier and faster than what Sabbath or Purple were doing at the exact same moment. They were raw, chaotic, and utterly uncompromising. Yet, like a supernova, their brilliant explosion was tragically brief. A second album that leaned into more complex, multi-part suites confused the few listeners they had gained, and a lack of label support saw them vanish completely by 1973. For decades, they were little more than a whisper among die-hard record collectors. Did you know that a May 1971 review of Kingdom Come and Cream magazine by critic Mike Saunders is widely considered the very first time the term heavy metal ever appeared in print to describe a style of music? They weren't just playing the genre, they were literally the ones who got it named. For those who unearth their records today, it's like discovering the genre's ferocious, untamed id. But another trio was crafting chaos just as wild. 2. Dust. Imagine a band of teenagers from New York, barely out of high school, crafting music with the technical proficiency and compositional maturity of seasoned veterans. That was Dust, featuring Mark Bell, who would later become the legendary Marky Ramone on drums, Kenny Aronson on bass, and the prodigiously talented Richie Wise on guitar and vocals. Dust was a hard rock power trio with a shockingly heavy and sophisticated sound. In just 2 years, they released 2 phenomenal albums, 1971's Dust and 1972's Heart Attack. Their music was a potent brew of proto-metal, bluesy swagger, and an almost progressive level of musicianship. Tracks like From a Dry Camel showcased blistering guitar work and a rhythm section that was impossibly tight. They had the chops to stand toe-to-toe with any of the British greats, and their album art, created by the legendary Frank Frazetta for Heart Attack, gave them a fantasy metal aesthetic years before it became a staple. So why did they disappear? It was a classic case of being too young, too soon. Despite their immense talent, the band members were pulled in different directions. With little promotional push, they disbanded in 1972, just as the scene they were helping to build was starting to explode. Interestingly, their legacy lived on, not just through Marky Ramone, but through producer Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise, who would go on to produce the first 2 albums for a little band called Kiss. Dust may be a forgotten name, but their DNA is secretly embedded in some of rock's most iconic acts. Then came a group whose future touched rock royalty. 3. Lucifer's Friend. What do you get when you combine a powerhouse British vocalist with a German band steeped in progressive rock and jazz fusion? You get Lucifer's Friend, one of the most dynamic and criminally overlooked bands of the entire decade. Their 1970 self-titled debut is a cornerstone of early heavy metal, an organ-drenched, riff-heavy monster fronted by the incredible John Lawton. Songs like Ride the Sky were as heavy and dark as anything by Black Sabbath or Uriah Heep, establishing them as pioneers of the occult rock sound. Here's where their story gets complicated. Instead of capitalizing on that heavy momentum, Lucifer's Friend became a musical chameleon. Each subsequent album was a daring exploration into a completely different genre, from progressive rock to jazz fusion to straight-up pop. Fans who loved the sledgehammer riffs of the debut were baffled by the complex jazz rock of 1974's I'm Just a Rock and Roll Singer. They were a band without a fixed identity in an industry that demanded easy categorization. Fascinatingly, vocalist John Lawton's immense talent didn't go completely unnoticed. In 1976, he was chosen to replace David Byron in Uriah Heep, one of the biggest heavy rock bands in the world, lending his voice to classic albums like Firefly and Innocent Victim. Fans who witnessed Lucifer's Friend in their prime, however, will tell you that their debut album remains an essential dark gem of early metal, a tantalizing glimpse of a band that had the potential for world domination. And next, a shape-shifting band with a haunted voice. 4. Budgie. From the unlikely heavy metal breeding ground of Cardiff, Wales, came Budgie, a power trio with a sound as quirky as their name. For nearly a decade, they churned out album after album of wonderfully inventive, riff-centric heavy metal that became a secret handshake among those in the know. With Burke Shelley's unique high-pitched yelp of a voice and Tony Burge's endlessly creative guitar work, Budgie created a sound that was instantly recognizable. They never wrote a simple song, often weaving together multiple tempos and earth-shaking riffs into a single track like their iconic Bread Fan. They toured relentlessly and were beloved by a fiercely loyal fan base, especially in their native UK, and surprisingly in Poland. They had all the ingredients: the powerful riffs, the unique vocals, and a knack for writing unforgettable songs. So why did they remain a cult act? Perhaps they were too eccentric for the mainstream. Their song titles, Nude Disintegrating Parachutist Woman, Hot as a Docker's Armpit, and their often whimsical lyrics stood in stark contrast to the serious, epic themes of their peers. Did you know that Budgie's influence far outweighs their commercial success? A new generation of metal titans in the 80s cited them as a primary inspiration. Metallica famously covered both Bread Fan and Crash Course in Brain Surgery, introducing the Welsh trio to millions of new fans. Iron Maiden covered I Can't See My Feelings. Budgie is the ultimate your favorite band's favorite band, a treasure trove of riffs still waiting to be fully appreciated by the masses. Now, meet the oddball birds who secretly inspired legends. 5. Captain Beyond. Visualize a supergroup forged from the ashes of legendary bands destined to create something entirely new. Captain Beyond was exactly that. The lineup was a dream team. Vocalist Rod Evans, fresh from being the original singer for Deep Purple, drummer Bobby Caldwell from Johnny Winter's band, and two members of the seminal heavy rock act Iron Butterfly. They weren't just a band, they were a progressive hard rock entity whose 1972 self-titled debut album is a masterpiece of the genre. The album is a seamless journey, with intricate songs flowing directly into one another, blending heavy, fuzzed-out riffs with complex Latin rhythms and spacey, psychedelic passages. It was musically light years ahead of its time, defying easy categorization. Tracks like Dancing Madly Backwards on a Sea of Air showed a level of compositional ambition that few could match. They had the pedigree, the vision, and the musical chops to be absolutely massive. Yet it all fell apart with bewildering speed. The band was plagued by internal strife and what many describe as poor management and promotion from their label, Capricorn Records, which was more focused on southern rock acts. Rod Evans left after the second album, and the magic was gone. Interestingly, fans who were lucky enough to see their original lineup live described the performances as transcendent, a near-religious experience of musical virtuosity. Today, their debut album is hailed by critics and musicians as one of the most ambitious and brilliant rock records ever made, a timeless piece of art that simply arrived on the wrong planet at the wrong time. But what if a supergroup broke before it soared? 6. Pentagram. For every band that missed its shot, there is Pentagram, a band that missed its shot a dozen times over for 5 decades. Led by the enigmatic and tortured frontman Bobby Liebling, Pentagram from Virginia was one of the earliest American bands to channel the doomy, sludgy spirit of Black Sabbath, starting as early as 1971. Throughout the 70s, they wrote and recorded a treasure trove of songs that are now considered foundational texts of doom metal. Tracks like Forever My Queen and When the Screams Come were dark, heavy, and dripping with an authentic sense of despair. They had the songs, the sound, and a magnetic, if self-destructive, frontman. They were on the verge of being signed multiple times, even attracting interest from members of KISS. So what went wrong? In a word, everything. A toxic combination of band infighting, catastrophic drug abuse, and soul-crushingly bad luck kept them from ever releasing a proper album during their 1970s prime. Their legendary 70s material existed only on obscure demo tapes, traded by tape traders like Mythical Artifacts. It's a story of almost unbelievable perseverance. Decades later, in the 80s and 90s, those old demos were finally compiled and released, and the world finally heard what it had been missing. The band, in various forms, reformed, and their tragic story was chronicled in the acclaimed 2011 documentary, Last Days Here. Pentagram represents the ultimate rock and roll tragedy, a band that wrote the rule book for a genre but couldn't get it published until it was almost too late. Next is the band that doomed itself over decades. 7. Cactus. Imagine taking the rhythm section of the Jeff Beck Group, two of the most revered musicians in rock, and pairing them with a wild blues-shouting vocalist and a blistering guitarist. That was the recipe for Cactus. Often called the American Led Zeppelin, Cactus was a blues rock and hard rock powerhouse formed in 1969 by bassist Tim Bogert and drummer Carmine Appice. Their plan was to form a band with Jeff Beck and Rod Stewart, but a car accident took Beck out of commission, so they recruited singer Rusty Day and guitarist Jim McCarty. What they created was pure, high-octane boogie rock on steroids. Their first three albums, Cactus, One Way, Or Another, and Restrictions, are masterclasses in energetic, tightly wound, heavy rock. The interplay between Bogert and Appice was legendary, a rhythm section that was simultaneously a lead instrument. They were faster, groovier, and more raucous than many of their contemporaries, delivering electrifying live shows that left audiences breathless. They had the power, the groove, and the musical pedigree to rival any band on the planet. Then came America's wildest answer to Led Zeppelin. 8. Leaf Hound. Picture a band recording one single, perfect album, and then vanishing from the face of the earth, leaving behind a record so rare it would become a holy grail for vinyl collectors. That is the story of Leaf Hound. Formed from the ashes of another UK blues rock band called Black Cat Bones, Leaf Hound existed for a brief, glorious moment in 1970. Fronted by the powerful, raspy vocals of Peter French, they recorded the album Growers of Mushroom. The album is a flawless slab of fuzzed-out, riff-driven heavy rock. It's raw, energetic, and possesses a dark, groovy quality that puts it in the same league as early Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. Songs like Freelance Fiend are pure proto-metal perfection. It had everything: killer riffs, a phenomenal vocalist, and a tight, powerful rhythm section. It should have been the start of a legendary career. However, the band fell apart almost immediately after the album was recorded, even before its official release in 1971. With no band to promote it, the album sank without a trace. Did you know that original pressings of Growers of Mushroom have become one of the most sought-after collector's items in rock music, with copies fetching thousands of dollars? Decades later, the album was rediscovered and hailed as a lost classic, a perfect snapshot of the heavy rock scene at its most potent. Peter French would go on to have stints in Cactus and Atomic Rooster, but the lightning in a bottle captured on that One Leaf Hound album remains a singular, legendary achievement. But could one perfect album be enough for glory? 9. Riot. What happens when you combine the twin guitar fury of British bands like Judas Priest with the raw, street-level energy of New York City? You get Riot, one of the earliest and most underappreciated pioneers of American heavy metal. Formed in 1975, Riot's debut album Rock City was a declaration of intent, but it was their 1979 masterpiece Narita that should have made them superstars. Their sound was a high-speed collision of intricate guitar harmonies, relentless drumming, and the soaring vocals of Guy Speranza. They had the musical firepower, especially in the guitar duo of Mark Riol and Rick Ventura, to rival any band from the burgeoning New England wave of British heavy metal. They even had a bizarre but memorable seal-headed mascot named Johnny. They toured with major acts like AC/DC and Sammy Hagar and delivered blistering live performances that earned them a devoted following. Despite their talent and critical acclaim, especially in the UK and Japan, where they were hailed as heroes, widespread success in their home country remained cruelly out of reach. A combination of poor label decisions, management woes, and the difficulty of a New York band breaking through in a scene dominated by West Coast and British acts kept them on the fringes. Interestingly, the title of their classic album, Narita, refers to the violent protests occurring at Japan's Narita International Airport, a subject matter far more political and obscure than their peers were tackling. Riot's influence on the development of speed and power metal is immense, and they remain a shining example of a band that had all the right ingredients but never got to serve the main course. Now, enter a New York band with unstoppable fire. 10. Atomic Rooster. Imagine a band built around the dark, menacing sound of a distorted Hammond organ, led by a genuinely brilliant but troubled musical visionary. Welcome to the macabre, progressive world of Atomic Rooster. The band was the brainchild of keyboardist Vincent Crane and drummer Carl Palmer, who both left the crazy world of Arthur Brown in 1969. While Palmer would soon depart to help form the prog rock behemoth Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Crane guided Atomic Rooster through the 70s with a singular, dark vision. Their sound was a unique fusion of heavy rock, prog, and funereal blues, all dominated by Crane's virtuosic and aggressive organ playing. Albums like Death Walks Behind You 1970 and In Hearing of Atomic Rooster 1971 are landmarks of the era. With a rotating cast of incredible musicians, including several powerful vocalists like John Ducan and Chris Farlow, they scored legitimate hit singles in the UK, including the iconic Tomorrow Night and The Devil's Answer. They were a major force, known for their intense and brooding live shows. So why are they not mentioned in the same breath as the genre's giants? Crane's struggles with mental health led to constant lineup instability, and the band's sound was often too dark and complex for mainstream American audiences. They were caught in a strange limbo, too heavy for prog fans, too proggy for some metal fans. Fascinatingly, Vincent Crane's influence is profound. His pioneering use of the keyboard as a heavy lead instrument paved the way for countless others, from Deep Purple's John Lord to many in the prog and metal scenes that followed. Atomic Rooster remains a testament to a singular, dark genius. But behind the organ roared a darker, deeper madness. 11. Stars. Visualize a band groomed for rock stardom with slick hooks, an arena-ready sound, and the backing of top industry management. That was Stars. Formed in New Jersey in the mid-70s, they were managed by Bill Aucoin, the same man who guided Kiss to superstardom. With their blend of power pop catchiness and hard rock muscle, they seemed like a surefire bet for success. Their self-titled 1976 debut and its 1977 follow-up, Violation, were packed with radio-friendly anthems and crunchy guitar riffs. Fronted by the charismatic Michael Lee Smith, Stars had the look, the songs, and the connections. They opened for major acts like Aerosmith and Ted Nugent, and their live shows were tight and energetic. Songs like She's Just a Fallen Angel and Cherry Baby had all the makings of massive hits. They were poised to take over the world. And yet, it never happened. Despite the pedigree and the quality of their music, they fell victim to what many describe as a classic case of a record label that didn't know how to promote them. Were they a pop band, a hard rock band, a heavy metal band? The label couldn't decide, and the promotion was consequently muddled and ineffective. Did you know that despite their own lack of chart success, Stars became hugely influential to the 80s glam metal scene that would later conquer the world? Bands like Motley Crue, Poison, and Bon Jovi have all cited Stars as a key influence on their sound and songwriting. They were the perfect prototype that tragically never made it off the assembly line. Then came a band built for fame, yet denied it. 12 Buffalo. Down under, while AC/DC was gearing up for global domination, another band from Sydney was churning out a sound that was far heavier, sludgier, and more primal. That band was Buffalo. Alongside their countryman Blackfeather, they are considered absolute pioneers of Australian heavy metal and pub rock. Led by the powerful, commanding vocals of Dave Tice, Buffalo's sound from 1972 to 1976 was raw, aggressive, and uncompromisingly heavy. Albums like Volcanic Rock 1973 and Only Want You for Your Body 1974 are now considered classics of the proto-doom and stoner rock genres. Their album covers were notoriously controversial, often featuring graphic or suggestive imagery that got them banned from stores, severely hampering their commercial potential right out of the gate. They were a no-frills, high-volume assault built on monstrously heavy riffs and a swaggering, earthy groove. They were the real deal, playing a style of music that wouldn't be fully appreciated for decades. Meanwhile, Australia was hiding something even heavier than AC/DC. 13. Trapeze. Before Glenn Hughes became the voice of rock in Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, he was the bassist and lead singer for a criminally underrated power trio from the UK called Trapeze. Alongside guitarist Mel Galley and drummer Dave Holland, Trapeze crafted a unique and soulful blend of hard rock, funk, and R&B that set them apart from virtually everyone else. Their 1972 album, You Are the Music, We're Just the Band, is a masterpiece of this hybrid sound. Hughes's soaring, multi-octave vocals were, of course, the star of the show. But the band's power was in their incredible chemistry. They were a ridiculously tight live unit, able to lay down a heavy, driving riff one minute and then slip into a slinky funk groove the next. Songs like Black Cloud and Way Back to the Bone showcased a band that could rock with the best of them, but with a depth of soul and rhythm that was truly unique. They had a sound that was both heavy and incredibly danceable. Their downfall was, ironically, their own immense talent. In 1973, Glenn Hughes was headhunted by Deep Purple, one of the biggest bands in the world, an offer he couldn't refuse. While Trapeze continued with other members, the magic of that original trio was gone. Did you know that both of Hughes's bandmates would also go on to join metal royalty? Mel Galley would later join Whitesnake, and Dave Holland would become the longtime drummer for Judas Priest. Trapeze was a veritable breeding ground for legends, a band so talented that its members were simply too good to stay together. 14. Hawkwind. Were they heavy metal, proto-punk, psychedelic warriors? The answer is yes. Hawkwind was less a band and more a sprawling, anarchic commune of space rock pioneers who created some of the most hypnotic and heavy music of the 1970s. Their sound was a chaotic, swirling vortex of driving, repetitive riffs, otherworldly synthesizer squalls, and lyrics about sci-fi, fantasy, and urban decay. Their live shows were legendary multimedia spectacles, featuring dancers, light shows, and an overwhelming sensory experience. With their iconic 1972 album, Space Ritual, they captured the essence of their live ethos, creating a sprawling masterpiece of a concept album. They were the godfathers of space rock, but their influence on heavy metal is undeniable. The sheer power and brute force simplicity of riffs on songs like Master of the Universe were as heavy as anything being produced at the time. They were the soundtrack for a generation of disaffected youth looking for something far heavier and more cosmic than traditional rock. Hawkwind's legacy is strange. They are simultaneously a legendary cult band and perpetually underrated. Their chaotic nature and ever-shifting lineup made mainstream success impossible, but also ensured their creative vitality. Fascinatingly, their most famous member for a time was bassist and vocalist Lemmy Kilmister, who handled lead vocals on their biggest hit single, Silver Machine. After being fired from Hawkwind in 1975 for doing the wrong kind of drugs, Lemmy went on to form a little band called Motorhead, with the intention of creating the same kind of fast, aggressive space rock, but stripped down to its most brutal essentials. 15. Stray Dog. Imagine being an unknown American hard rock band discovered by a member of prog rock royalty and flown to London to record your debut album. That's the fairy tale beginning for Stray Dog. This Texas-based power trio was so impressive that Greg Emerson of Emerson, Lake & Palmer signed them to his own Manticore Records label and took them to England to produce their 1973 self-titled debut. The result was a blistering album of high-energy, blues-drenched heavy metal. With Snuffy Walden's fiery guitar playing and Al Roberts' powerhouse drumming, Stray Dog had a raw, untamed sound that felt both incredibly powerful and dangerously loose. The album was packed with killer riffs and a southern rock swagger that gave it a unique flavor compared to their British contemporaries. Tracks like Crazy and their cover of Chevrolet showed a band that was ready to take on the world with the backing of one of rock's biggest names. But the fairy tale quickly ended. Despite the quality of the debut and the prestigious connection to ELP, the album failed to sell. For their second album, the label pressured them to add a second guitarist and a keyboard player, diluting their raw power trio chemistry. The band lost its original fire and quickly faded into obscurity. Did you know that the band's gifted guitarist, W.G. Snuffy Walden, would later find massive, unexpected success in a completely different field? He became an Emmy-winning composer, writing the iconic theme music for television shows like The West Wing, Friday Night Lights, and Roseanne. 16. Bang! What if an American band had released an album that sounded remarkably like Black Sabbath's debut right around the same time, but got lost in the shuffle? That's the story of Bang, a power trio from Philadelphia. In 1971, they wrote and recorded an album of heavy, doomy proto-metal that was eventually released as their official debut, titled Death of a Country. However, their label, Capitol Records, shelved that ambitious concept album and instead had them record a more straightforward hard rock record, which became their self-titled 1972 release. This album, Bang, was still a fantastic piece of work, full of heavy riffs and catchy hooks, and even spawned a minor hit with the song Questions. But it was that lost debut and the material they wrote in their earliest days that marks their true genius. Songs like The Queen and Lions, Christians are pure, unadulterated early doom metal with a raw power that is simply undeniable. They had the sound and the songs to be pioneers of the genre. The classic story of record label interference kneecapped them from the start. By forcing them to change their sound and shelve their more ambitious work, the label stripped them of their unique identity. They were marketed as a generic rock act and got lost in a crowded field. Decades later, when their original demos and the Death of a Country album were finally released properly, fans and critics were stunned. Here was a band that had the authentic doom metal sound right at the very beginning. 17. Yesterday's Children. In the murky pre-Sabbath era of the late 1960s, there were whispers of bands playing something heavier, darker, and stranger than anyone else. From Connecticut, a band called Yesterday's Children emerged as one of these proto-metal enigmas. Their one and only self-titled album, released in 1969, is a stunningly heavy and forward-thinking piece of work. Fronted by the powerful, howling vocals of Denise Croce, the band played a fuzzed-out, psychedelic hard rock that was years ahead of its time. The album is raw and drenched in feedback, with songs like Sailing and Paranoia showcasing a level of heaviness and lyrical darkness that was virtually unheard of for the era. The guitar tones are thick and menacing, and the rhythm section is relentless. This wasn't happy flower power rock. This was the sound of something heavy and unsettling creeping into the tail end of the psychedelic dream. They had stumbled upon the formula for heavy metal before the genre even had a name. So why did they vanish without a trace? They were simply too early. The album received zero promotion and was released to a world that wasn't ready for it. The band broke up shortly after, its members scattering to the winds, leaving their one monstrous album behind as a mysterious monolith. For decades, it was a ghost, a record known only to the most obsessive, crate-digging collectors. 18. T2. Imagine a band that perfectly blended the riff-heavy power of Black Sabbath with the intricate, multi-layered arrangements of King Crimson. That was the promise and the genius of the British power trio, T2. Their 1970 debut album, It'll All Work Out in Boomland, is an underground, progressive, and heavy rock masterpiece. The album is comprised of just 4 long tracks, the most famous being the sprawling, 21-minute epic, Morning. The band, led by the incredible talent of 17-year-old guitarist and songwriter Keith Cross, had a sound that was both brutally heavy and breathtakingly beautiful. Cross's guitar work was phenomenal, shifting from bone-crushing riffs to delicate acoustic passages with ease. They had the instrumental prowess of the best prog bands, but with a raw, primal power that put them squarely in the proto-metal camp. The album was critically acclaimed and should have been the launching pad for a massive career. 19. High Tide. If you're searching for the absolute heaviest band of the 1960s, your search might end with High Tide. This British band's 1969 debut, Sea Shanties, is an album of such ferocious, dark, and heavy intensity that it makes many of their more famous contemporaries sound tame by comparison. What set High Tide apart was their unique instrumentation. The interplay between Simon House's haunting, distorted electric violin and Tony Hill's crushing, fuzzed-out guitar created a sound that was utterly unique and menacing. This was not gentle, pastoral prog. This was a sonic maelstrom. Tracks like Feudalist's Lament and Death Warmed Up are dense, complex, and overwhelmingly powerful. Hill's vocals were raw and desperate, adding to the album's apocalyptic and gothic atmosphere. They were playing a style of music that wouldn't be fully explored again until the rise of gothic and doom metal more than a decade later. They were true originals, crafting a sound that had no precedent. Their music was perhaps too intense, too dark, and too complex for audiences in 1969. While they released a second album, High Tide, in 1970, they never gained any commercial traction and soon disbanded. Interestingly, violinist Simon House would go on to have a much more visible career, joining the ranks of Hawkwind and later playing with David Bowie. But for those 2 albums, High Tide created a sound that still feels shocking and powerful today. 20. UFO. It might seem strange to call a band as beloved as UFO Forgotten, but here's the reality. While their late 70s work with Michael Schenker is revered by die-hard rock fans, their earliest, heaviest, and most groundbreaking material remains criminally overlooked. Before they became a polished hard rock act, the original UFO, with guitarist Mick Bolton, was a heavy, psychedelic space rock outfit that was deeply influential. Their first 2 albums, UFO 1 and UFO 2, Flinging, were massive hits in Japan and Germany, but virtually ignored in the UK and US. This early version of the band played a unique style of heavy blues and space rock, characterized by long psychedelic jams and heavy hypnotic riffs. Songs like Prince Kajuku and the sprawling 26-minute Flying are essential documents of the era, showcasing a band exploring the outer limits of heavy rock. This was the foundation upon which their entire legacy was built, yet for many, the story of UFO begins in 1974 with the album Phenomenon.